All right, ready to dive in. We're tackling a true literary heavyweight today. Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. It's one of those books that's always relevant, especially these days when we're all thinking about cultural identity and how history still shapes the world around us.
Yeah, it's a book that really gets under your skin. Achebe doesn't pull any punches. He just drops you right into the heart of pre-colonial Nigeria, immerses you in Igbo culture. You're not just reading about it, you're practically breathing it.
And we experience it all through Okonkwo, right? This guy is intense, ambitious, haunted by his father's legacy. Talk about pressure.
Oh yeah, the weight on this man's shoulders is immense. You see, in Okonkwo's world, every action, every word is judged against this incredibly strict code of masculinity. And it's not just external pressure, it's internalized. He feels this burning need to prove himself, to embody strength in a way his father never could. It's what makes him both a pillar of his community and, as we'll see, incredibly vulnerable.
Right from the start, you get this sense of a society so rooted in tradition. Rituals, ceremonies, a whole way of life that feels so vibrant, but also maybe a little inflexible.
Exactly. And that's crucial to understand because Achebe doesn't just show us a static world. Into this world of deep tradition crashes this massive force of change. British colonialism, imagine. The Igbo people, rooted in their ancient ways, suddenly confronted with these outsiders promising salvation. It wasn't just a clash of cultures, it was a power struggle. Language, religion, even everyday interactions. They all become weapons in this battle for the soul of a people.
Hearing you describe it like that, it's clearly not a simple case of good versus bad, is it? It's so much more nuanced.
Exactly. Achebe masterfully avoids those simplistic portrayals. He forces us to confront the complexities within Igbo society itself, the expectations on men, the caste system, even the treatment of those considered different within their own culture. All these tensions make the arrival of colonialism even more, well, explosive. It's like a fault line running through an already fragile landscape.
And Okonkwo, he's standing right on that fault line. It's almost like his personal struggles mirror the upheaval that's happening to his entire culture.
Precisely. Think about his exile from Umuofia, for example.
Mm.
This terrible accident forces him to face his deepest fears, his own internalized anxieties about weakness. It's like his exile becomes this microcosm of the larger societal shift that's looming on the horizon. A really fascinating parallel.
That exile feels like a major turning point in the story because while he's gone, those outside forces, those missionaries, they really start to gain a foothold in Umufia. Can you unpack that a bit?
Well, imagine it this way. A whole new belief system arises, and while some might be receptive, it directly challenges the very core of Umufia's existing traditions and beliefs. And this is where Achebe's brilliance really shines through. He doesn't just paint the missionaries as one-dimensional villains. Instead, he allows us to see their perspective too, how their beliefs, even if well-intentioned, land on the Igbo worldview like.
Well, let's just say it's not exactly a smooth integration. It becomes this head-on collision, right? You have Okonkwo battling his own demons, his own rigid code of masculinity, while his entire world is grappling with these massive external forces. What struck you most about how Achebe portrays this pivotal moment in the story?
It's the subtlety, the way he captures this gradual erosion of traditional life. It's not a sudden overthrow, it's more like this slow, almost insidious shift in power dynamics. The questioning of deeply held beliefs, even the very language people use, begins to change. It's like watching the ground shift beneath their feet.
You make a fascinating point about language. I mean, Achebe wrote this book in English, which adds a whole other layer to this idea of cultural dominance, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. That was a very deliberate choice on Achebe's part. By writing the language of the colonizers, he's reclaiming the narrative, subverting it from within. He's able to tell this story from an authentically African perspective, on his own terms, and that, I think, is incredibly powerful.
And then Okonkwo, he finally returns to Umofia. It's heartbreaking, to return to the only place you've ever called home, only to find, well, that it's not really home anymore.
It's a brutal homecoming. And not just for Okonkwo, but for Umuofia as a whole. He expects to just step back into his old life, to rally his people against this tide of change, but the world he knew is gone. The very foundations of his world, the beliefs he fought for, bled for, they're crumbling around him.
And that iron will of his, that unbending strength, it becomes his downfall, doesn't it? He goes from being this tragic hero to almost, I don't know, a cautionary figure.
It's like watching a caged animal flinging itself against the bars.
Yeah.
Desperate to break free, but only hurting itself in the process. Achebe is so good at showing how Okonkwo's fatal flaw, this inability to adapt, to let go of the past. It's ultimately what destroys him. And what makes it even more tragic is that you see how trapped he is, how limited his options really are.
It's like that line from the book, things fall apart, the center cannot hold. It just encapsulates the whole tragedy so perfectly, the weight of colonialism, the personal losses, everything.
Right. That title is pure genius. It works on so many levels. On the surface, it's about the disintegration of Umuofia's traditions under colonial rule. But it also reflects what's happening to Okonkwo internally, the fracturing of his identity. He's losing his status, his beliefs, his whole world. It all comes crashing down.
It's such a powerful metaphor for the broader impact of colonialism, too. It's not just about politics and power structures, it's about individual lives being shattered. You really feel that loss, that sense of something precious being ripped away.
And that's why I think Things Fall Apart continues to resonate so strongly with readers even today, across cultures, across time. It speaks to that universal human experience of change, of grappling with tradition versus modernity. That struggle to hold on to your identity when the whole world seems determined to erase it.
It really makes you think about what it must have been like to live through those times, and not just in Nigeria, but globally. These power struggles, these stories, they've played out again and again throughout history.
Absolutely. Achebe's work forces us to remember that the legacy of colonialism, the consequences of those historical forces, well, they haven't disappeared. The ripple effects are still felt, both in subtle ways and in ways that are impossible to ignore.
It's a sobering thought, but it's important to acknowledge those wounds, don't you think? It makes you wonder, how do we navigate those forces of change in our own lives? How do we preserve what's valuable from the past while still moving forward?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And while Achebe doesn't necessarily offer any easy answers, he gives us the tools we need to start asking those tough questions. He makes us confront these uncomfortable truths about power, about identity, about the true cost of the choices we make.
And he did it all by shifting the narrative in such a powerful way. Before Things Fall Apart, how often did we hear stories told from the perspective of the colonized? How many stories truly gave voice to their experiences, their struggles, their humanity?
That's what makes this book so important, so groundbreaking. It's a direct challenge to centuries of colonial narratives, the ones that often depicted Africa and its people through this very particular, often dehumanizing lens. Achebe takes that lens and flips it, forcing us to see the world through the eyes of those who had been silenced for far too long.
He gave an entire generation a voice, and the echoes of that voice are still being heard today. It's incredible, isn't it? The way Achebe's work has had such a lasting impact. He wasn't just writing for his time, he was writing for the future. For us, even too.
Think about it. We're here, decades later, still grappling with the effects of colonialism, still seeing cultures collide, still navigating constant change. And Things Fall Apart is right there with us, as relevant as ever.
It's the definition of a classic, right? It goes beyond a specific time or place and speaks to some universal truth about the human experience.
Without a doubt, the themes Achebe tackles, ambition, fear, the struggle to honor tradition while facing the unknown, that's what it means to be human, isn't it? And he does it all with such incredible depth, creating characters that feel both real and larger than life at the same time.
You know, finishing Things Fall Apart, it's hard not to feel a sense of, I don't know, warning almost, like a reminder of what can happen when we fail to understand and respect other cultures, other ways of seeing the world.
It's definitely a cautionary tale, but a deeply human one. Achebe doesn't pretend to have all the answers. He shows us a complex, often tragic reality and asks us to confront these difficult questions about power, about who we are, about the price we pay for what we call progress.
It's one of those books that stays with you long after you've finished it. Makes you think, makes you feel, makes you want to learn more.
And isn't that the mark of truly great literature? It should open our eyes, challenge what we think we know, and spark conversations that last longer than the time it takes to read the book. So if this deep dive has left you wanting to explore more, I encourage you. Pick up Achebe's other works. Discover other African authors exploring these same complex human themes. There's a whole world of stories out there waiting to be discovered. Stories that can teach us, challenge us, and ultimately bring us together in ways we never thought possible.
It's a powerful reminder that even though things do fall apart, the stories, the ideas, those endure. And they give us this amazing opportunity to understand ourselves and the world a little bit better. And sometimes that's all it takes to start asking the right questions.
You got it. And maybe, just maybe, if we keep asking those questions, if we truly listen to different points of view, we can keep things from falling apart quite so completely in the future.